Letting Go at Chateau Duveaux is a podcast hosted by a queer millennial, myself, who spent the last 7 years in intense therapy unpacking the trauma that went along with growing up in environments where I felt unseen, unheard, and where I always had to make myself feel smaller. We're going to dive into a lot of important topics. And I want to be clear about something. Even if you're not queer and you stumble upon this podcast, you might actually enjoy it and possibly learn something from it. So join me for episode 2, where we talk about the stereotypes we're handed. Hello and welcome. I can't believe I'm going to say it, to the second episode of my podcast. So this has been a long time coming. I filmed an introductory episode months ago, and nothing ever came after it. I filmed episode 2 like 20 million times. I was so in my head about it, and then I got busy because I just moved to New York City. I actually 2 weeks ago. Tomorrow marks 2 weeks. So I got really busy, and now that I'm settled and I'm in the city and I'm in my place that I'm going to be for the first few months, I'm ready to start this podcast and be consistent about it. And I'm excited to have you all come on the journey. So, as you can tell, I rebranded. We are called Letting Go at Chateau Duveaux. And originally, a year ago, I did a couple of episodes. I started the podcast a year ago under the name Letting Go at Chateau Duveaux. And then when I decided to bring this back, what happened was I felt like, and we'll get into this in some future episodes, and we'll kind of start a little bit today, but to survive, I had always sort of been a caricature as myself as a gay man. I felt like I had to fit a certain stereotype. I felt like I had to be this person here with this group of people and a different person over here with a different group. And so I had sort of created these caricatures of myself. And I always had just like a silly, funny name on Facebook. And so originally the title was Letting Go at Chateau Duveaux with Klaus Bjorn. That was like Klaus Bjorn was my like alias, my Anastasia Beaverhausen, if you will. Karen Walker, Will and Grace reference. But I had always had, a name or a caricature to protect myself, to stand behind, so that I didn't have to be my true self with everybody, or even with myself for that matter. And so when I brought this back, I felt that I had to find a name that had like no silliness to it. And then what I found was, no, it's a fun name, it's a good name. While we are going to actually discuss heavy topics, we're also going to have fun. And on my social media, it's not always going to be super, super heavy. I'm going to talk about sometimes pop culture and other things and just my journey here in New York City. And with my personality, I felt that we can go deep, but also like that name should represent a little bit of who I really am. And so I went back to Letting Go at Chateau Duveaux with Tommy. And so that's the name. We're sticking with it. Anyone that knows me knows that sometimes I've changed my name on social media quite a bit. Promise you, this is the name we're sticking with. So here we go. Let's get into it. I'm in my mid to late 30s, and I recently woke up one day a few years ago, and I just realized that I had been doing so much um, personal healing work, personal growth. And what I found though is that some of the habits or tendencies that I found in my personal life, I had transferred over into my work life. And I hadn't fully healed yet in some aspects. And I was still carrying on to some things, still carrying on to some anger that really needed to be let go of. And my work life was quietly repeating patterns, the same sort of patterns over and over and over again. Patterns are always going to repeat until you face them square in the eye and actually say, no, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm sick of my own BS. That's when you can start to truly move on and move forward. So, what this brought me to was I actually made a very drastic change in my life. For me, back in my 20s, I came to New York City and I was only here for about 4 or 5 months. And I just got really freaked out. I felt I wasn't enough, that I couldn't make it. And I left without truly giving myself the chance. To be honest, I probably wasn't ready to go for it. But I found myself looking back at that time and going, I wish I would have just stuck it out a little bit longer, because I really was starting to find my way. And so I regretted walking away from the opportunities that this city could give me. And so what I decided to do was make a drastic change. in my 30s, my mid 30s. Like I said, I'm in my mid to late 30s. I don't like admitting that, but it's the truth. So, and my whole thing is I'm going to be authentic. So I guess I'm going to have to tell you that. But I made this drastic change. I lived on my own. I loved it. I loved the part of town that I was in. I loved my place. I, loved my furnishings and just the decor that I was doing and just curating this beautiful place for myself. Um, but I wasn't building a life professionally that really fit me. So what I did was I got rid of my place. I put all my stuff in storage and I moved in with my parents. Then cut to a couple years later and I said I'm going to just go for it and move to New York. So I quit a comfortable job. It was a good job, but if I'm being honest, it was not the right fit for me anymore. There's an image that I saw recently of a plate in like a grate in the ground, like on a sidewalk, and the plate fits into this grate. But there's a little quote above it that says, just because you fit doesn't mean it's the right place for you. And that is the perfect way to sort of sum up my last professional experience. And so I decided to leave. And for the first time in my life, I stopped worrying about making everyone else around me happy and comfortable. And I started focusing on what I really wanted to make myself happy. Now, I could have never gotten here had I not started dealing with my own BS and dealing with my personal relationships as well. And that's where I started, was the personal side. So 7 years ago, I left a relationship that was truly emotionally and psychologically abusive. I didn't know it at the time, but walking away from that relationship was the beginning of a much, much deeper journey. And if I'm being honest, I can look back at it now and say, part of the reason I stayed in that relationship so long was because I knew there was a much deeper journey ahead that really truly scared me. I was so fearful of it. I was so fearful of finally taking a look at myself. But the truth was, I had always repeated patterns in relationships. I was always choosing the wrong person. And I was always choosing somebody who, in the end, would hurt me. I was always in these toxic situations. And I just got to a point at the end of this relationship where I said, I don't want to be in a toxic relationship. I don't want to jump from toxic relationship to toxic relationship and continue being miserable for the rest of my life. And this is the thing though. Well, that person had their issues. I am also guilty. I was addicted to being in a toxic relationship. I was addicted to some form of chaos. And I really had to look at myself and say, what's going on with you? Because all your relationships are toxic. So guess what? You are the common denominator. And that's a really hard thing to actually admit and own. And that's why I had avoided having to go and do this deep work for so long. But it got to a point where, like I said earlier, you have to get sick of your own BS. You have to be so tired of it that you're finally ready to look at yourself in the mirror and go, who the heck are you? So some of the questions I really had to ask myself was, why do I feel so lost all the time? Why am I always choosing toxic relationships? Why am I always choosing people that do not see me? And why do I keep trying to be someone that I'm not simply to be accepted? Because I did that in every relationship, every personal relationship, and every professional relationship. And once I started doing the work, I started to see where that all came from, which we will get into all of that. We will unravel that as we go through more episodes. So this brought me to starting therapy. And what I thought would just be about healing from one relationship ended up unlocking absolutely everything I had been carrying for years. And a lot of the things that I was carrying, I didn't even know I was carrying. I began to unpack more than I realized I even could. And what I started to realize through the process was I was actually way stronger than I ever thought I was. And that gave me courage to keep going because there were times, I will tell you, where in some of that deepest work where I really started to uncover things that I had basically sort of blocked out of my mind for years. I remember sometimes going home after a session and just thinking, just feeling so heavy and thinking, I don't know that I can continue to do this. This is exhausting, and then you realize I've come so far. I can't stop now. And you remember, for me, I remembered I was sick of my own BS. I don't want to go back there. And so you start to keep going because you start to realize that you have a lot more courage in you than you thought you would ever have. I was somebody that if I would have watched somebody talk about these same things 10 years ago, I would have said to myself, I don't have that type of courage. But guess what? I did. And you do too. So growing up gay, I felt like the world had already given me or decided who I was. And this was before I ever had a chance to figure it out on my own. And I think that that happens to a lot of queer people. And that's a really difficult place to be. So I brought up Will and Grace earlier, and I did that on purpose. There was a reason that was calculated. For some reason, the world picked that I was Jack from Will and Grace. I can't tell you how many times I heard, even before I came out, have you ever seen Will and Grace? And I'd say, yes. And they'd say, you know who you remind me of? Jack. And listen, here's the thing. I loved Jack. I loved that character. But what wasn't fair was you were automatically thrusting a stereotype on me before I've had a chance to really decide who I am. I'm me. I'm not him. I'm not some character that you see on television. Now, do not get me wrong. Will and Grace was a groundbreaking series. And I'm so glad that it aired because it really opened a door to queer people being on network television and being able to be open about it and say it. And so I have nothing but respect for that series. But for me, being told over and over that I remind somebody basically of a stereotype, it's not fair because there's several different ways to be a gay man. Yes, there's plenty of people like Jack, and I do. There's definitely parts of me that resonate with Jack, and I can see why people would say it. But there's also parts of me that sort of resonate with Will. Being put into a stereotype before you've decided who you are drove me crazy. And I don't want to chastise the people that said that because a lot of them had never really dealt with anybody that was gay. And I think in some ways people thought that they were complimenting me. But what I want for people to understand now is how it does affect people so that in the future, you can see it a little bit differently and you can go along with me on this journey and learn. It's okay to be any type of gay man that you want. You want to go and renovate a bathroom. I have a friend who sometimes jokes around and says he's a bad gay. And it always bothers me when he does that because he's not. But he loves building things. He's not into the stereotypical things you think of for a gay man. And that is 110% okay. He is still a gay man. When you are constantly telling somebody who they are and fitting them into a specific stereotype before they know who they are, telling them that you remind them of this gay person or that gay person, or that's weird. You don't do the things that normal gay guys do. So wait, are you actually gay? Saying things like that to somebody, it drives me absolutely crazy. And the thing that drove me the most crazy about me being put into a stereotype before I knew who I was is you're talking about a character. I'm a person. There's so much more to me than that. What people didn't understand was how painful it felt to be reduced to just a stereotype, especially when I'm still trying to figure out who I am. And this has happened, I know this happened to a lot more people than just myself. Sometimes reducing someone to a stereotype, it makes them feel less than. And for years, I truly felt like I was less than. But as I went through therapy, I started to realize I created versions of myself simply to survive. I had the version of me that was safe around straight men. And in high school, I would sometimes deepen my voice a little bit. Not around all straight men, but especially around people that I really did not feel the most comfortable with. I would deepen my voice a little bit because I always got told that I sounded like a woman. So when I was around those men, that version of myself didn't talk too much. Um, I didn't move too freely. I didn't speak freely. And I didn't say anything that might make someone uncomfortable. I constantly made myself smaller. And I had done that my entire life. And at a certain point, that kind of that honestly kind of softening there, it breaks you. It truly breaks you at a certain point. Then there was the version of me that performed the stereotype, the one that was funny, the one that was fabulous, because some people expected that from me because it made them laugh. And I liked to make people laugh because it actually made me feel accepted. And I never felt like if I showed who I really was, I would truly be accepted by people. So if I could make people laugh, even if it was at my expense, it made me feel more worthy in the moment. But then down the road, there's some shame attached to that as time went on. But it was just easier to do that than explain who I really was. Underneath all of that was the real me, the one I didn't even know yet, the scared one nobody had met either. But like I said, he was quiet because he didn't know if it was safe to come out, not just as gay, but simply as himself. And here's the part that used to make my blood boil. Because I was more feminine, people didn't just assign me a personality, they assigned me a gender role. They'd say things like, "Oh, so you're the woman in the relationship, right?" As if my softness made me less of a man. No, honey, we're both men. Again, if you were somebody watching this who said that to me, please understand that you I understand that you probably did not know how that would make me feel. And I probably didn't tell you. And initially, I never really thought about it until time went on and I started really working through things in therapy and I realized that's actually something that I truly hate. I don't want to hear it anymore. So, if you are somebody that said that to me and you know me, understand that I still love you. Just know that in the future, maybe don't say that to me. Because what it says is it's this idea that relationships, especially queer ones, have to be built on traditional gender roles. That's a projection, not our truth. I spent years being handed these roles: feminine, emotional, dramatic, submissive, all before I even had the chance to define myself. And listen, I said dramatic, and sometimes because I was softer and I was more emotional, I got labeled dramatic when I really was just trying to be seen. But I do love a little drama from time to time, I'm not gonna lie. But when I finally tried to start figuring out who I was under all of that, I didn't even have a clue where to start. I had no idea who I was, but I started anyways. Like they say, start messy. Start when you don't know. Because trust me, you'll find your way. And it'll be the best thing you've ever done for yourself. So now I want to shift and I want to talk a little bit about what happens after you start letting go. Letting go of a stereotype, it sounds so freeing. But the truth is, what comes next is confusing and very raw and can become very emotional, especially for me or anyone who's made up different versions of themselves just to survive. Once you start to shed those versions of yourself or those caricatures that you hid behind, you feel like a fish out of water. Or to put it better, you feel like a human that is just gasping for air. When the role I was performing started to fall away, I didn't feel powerful. I felt empty. There was this period where I just had no clue who I was. And in some ways, even what I wanted. I had to unlearn the character that I had created and reconnect with parts of myself that I completely buried. And that meant going through and sifting through my own childhood traumas and the things that I went through, the times that I kept my mouth shut because I didn't maybe want people to figure out what was really going on with me and that I was actually gay. And there was actually a lot more there than I even realized. And so then there was this part where I just became extremely angry for a while because this kind of healing is messy and you feel lonely at times and you feel very vulnerable but at the end of the day, it's brave. And when you get to the other side, like I have, trust me, you are going to thank yourself for going through the rawest, most difficult parts. And you're going to thank yourself for finally feeling the emotion. I can't tell you, I don't like to cry, but I can't tell you how many times I would just start bawling in a session and I would get so uncomfortable. And my therapist knew this about me, but I would get so uncomfortable. And then sometimes I would even shut down because I was like, I can't continue talking about this because I'm so emotional and it's so uncomfortable for me. But if you are following me on social media, you'll notice that some of my voiceovers, my voice starts to crack a little bit. Ever since I've gone through this, I'm able to feel the emotion and truly feel it. And you have to get yourself to a point where instead of burying it all, you allow yourself to feel it. And if that means you have to cry, you have to cry. Let it out. Because trust me, when you start actually feeling it, you're going to feel so much better on the other end. So, where am I at now? Well, in some ways, I'm still figuring my life out. I made a huge move to New York City, like I mentioned earlier, and I'm looking for my next professional endeavor. And I'm starting this podcast, and I'm trying to post more on social media. And I don't fully know what I'm doing, but guess what? I'm doing it because now I lead with curiosity instead of performance and having to be perfect. I'm more interested in how I feel than how I'm perceived. And I'm learning that it's okay if I don't fit into everyone's idea of what I should be. And guess what? Some people are not going to like the things that I say on here. They're not going to like it. And that's fine. But I'm going to continue to be me because I've come too far to go back to making myself small again. I am rewriting my story and I'm rewriting it in my own words. So as we close this episode out, I want to ask everyone a question and I want to leave you with this. Have you ever felt like someone handed you a label before you even knew who you were? Have you ever looked in the mirror and thought, is this really me? Or is this just a version that I'm expected to be because someone else told me I had to be this way? If that truly resonates with you, I hope you'll stick around. And please, by all means, leave me some comments in the comment section. Let me know things that you'd like to hear me talk about, or also the questions that I posed to all of you. Let me know what some of your perspectives are. I'd love to hear it, and I'd love to make this interactive as time goes on because there's so much more to say. There's more healing to do, and there's more things to unlearn. So until next time, breathe, feel, and let go when you're ready. Thank you for joining me today.